Hello and welcome to Rethinking Intelligence. I am your host, Cindy Dickman, and I'm excited as always to welcome you back. And today is our second guest in our series, Elevated Thoughts. And I'm really excited to welcome Stephen Ornes.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here.
Tell our listeners a little bit more so they know who they're listening to today. Stephen is an award-winning math and science writer who has been featured in Science, Quantum, Nature, The Washington Post, Popular Mechanics, and National Geographic Kids. He has authored two books, and he is also the writer in residence at Vanderbilt University, where he teaches science communication. And one of the things that really stuck out to me in what he said is he classifies himself as someone who turns research papers into human stories. And I love that. So,
Mhm.
welcome.
Great, thank you.
I would really like for you to share how you became a science writer because I don't feel like that's something that, even if we read something in one of these magazines, we don't think about the person and how they came to
Hmm.
writing such an incredible article. So, if you could share that, that'd be wonderful.
I'm not sure how far back to go. I spent my 20s in undertaking a lot of different jobs and careers, and so it actually took me a while to find science writing. And I think it's fair to say that every science writer you meet will have a different sort of origin story. There's no one path into the field. There's so many different directions that people come from. I mean, it makes sense in retrospect. When I was an undergraduate, I double majored in physics and English in creative writing. At the time, I thought that meant I wanted to write short stories and novels that were sort of physics inspired, but no one wanted to really publish my novels, as it turned out, which is fine.
Actually, write some novels and try to get them.
I mean, it was mostly short stories.
Okay,
Uh,
sure. Sorry.
Yeah, and I used to keep all my rejections on this like mobile that in my office. Because at that time you would get these like on nice paper, you would get these lovely rejections from really prestigious journals. I mean, they were still form letters, but they were, they showed that you were trying. They showed you were doing something. Many of my jobs in my 20s, I worked as a teacher. I helped start a charter school in downtown Dallas where I taught math and science for seventh, eighth, and ninth graders. I continued teaching, and at the same time, I had other jobs. I was a tutor. I used to go to kids' birthday parties and dress up as a mad scientist and do science tricks with them. So I was all over the place. I moved overseas and I taught in Spain for a couple years at a school there. But I did want to go back to school. I felt like I didn't have very good math tools to keep going in physics. So I felt like my goal was to go back and get some tools in math and then maybe return to physics. So I went back to graduate school for applied math. Realized 2 years in that even though I could work really hard and get, you know, finish these classes and these projects, it was not a natural, or it didn't come as easily to me as it did to my colleagues. I mean, I could watch them. It was something, they were sort of so calm and
It just all comes together in their brain, almost like so effortlessly.
yeah, and that was not my experience. I was covering chalkboards like over and over to just try to like memorize things and hope that it would sink in with this sort of brute force method. So after 2 years, I had a master's degree and I left. And at the time, I only understood that there were a couple things you could do with a master's in applied math. One was to be a math teacher, and the other was to be an actuary. I worked as an actuary for 6 months. It was a disaster. Then I went back to teaching. I loved teaching. I loved math teaching. I loved working with people who sort of students for whom math was easy for them, but they're pretty easy to teach because they sort of have that curiosity about math and they've done well and they excel. So it's exciting as a teacher to sort of like feel them on their way. But I also liked working with students who saw themselves as being math averse or they didn't like math. And at the time I realized too, like if you really want to shut down a party, you say, "Oh, I'm a math teacher," but I thought it was always interesting to, find ways other access points into some of these interesting math ideas that I thought were interesting. But I was still writing all the time. I was still writing essays just for myself. I mean, it was just sort of a compulsion. And so finally, a friend who was a journalist at some point said, "Well, I was sort of saying, oh, I love math teaching, but I wish I could write for a living." She's like, "Well, somebody's writing all those magazines, right? That you're reading,
Yeah.
and like someone's there, like their name. There's a like I said, in retrospect, it was like, oh, right, that's the thing." So I went
Yeah.
back to school one more time, did a 1 year program in science writing, and that program required an internship at the end. I I would joke that I was the oldest living intern in New York City because all the senior editor I went to Discover magazine. All the senior editors were like my age. By that point, I was married. I had a kid on the way. So, like I said, it took me a while, but that just launched everything. And that was 19 years ago. So I've been a freelance science writer ever since. And even though it started with wanting to write about math, I quickly realized that math is a hard sell. Editors don't really want to buy math. People don't really want to read math stories. So I had to expand. So I'm really a generalist now, and have really become a generalist. So which is such a luxury because it means that I can identify stories that are interesting to me and pursue them. And hopefully, I can convince an editor to get interested in it as well. And I do think what you said at the beginning, part of what I look for is, some of it is just straight news reporting, like sort of science journalism, and you're reporting on the finding. But a lot of stories, and really every story about science is a story about people. It's about making mistakes and some researcher who's been working on something for 10 or 15 or 20 years. So every time I do an interview, it's so energizing because you talk to someone about the thing they have devoted so much of their life to, or they're so interested in, or they have so much background. And so I'm coming into this conversation to just get the highlights, but there is this very human story driven by curiosity and tension and how did this go wrong and what do you do now that science funding is such a big question mark and there's so much uncertainty and then there are all these other factors. If you want to succeed as a scientist, you have to publish in prestigious journals, you have to get grant money, so it's not just I'm a brilliant scientist and I ask the right question and I do the right experiment and it turned out great and then I published it. There's there's a journey behind that.
Yeah.
So that in a nutshell, that's sort of what I look for in my writing is can I capture that human story or some interesting aspect of curiosity or resilience or conflict, in my pieces.
Because when I went back for my master's, it was in applied neuroscience. We both did applied things. And
Yeah.
reading research papers, you feel like each one could change the world in their own little corner. Right? If people knew about this,
Hmm.
there would be so many advances. And so that was actually how I read that comment, was that you kind of take these that just go and they sit in files, so to speak, in the research abyss where no one reads them, no one hears anything about kind of the groundbreakingness of them, and you bring them to light. So that's kind of this dusty idea off of the shelf, and you bring it out for people in a way that they can understand it and perhaps apply it. So
Yeah,
do you see yourself kind of doing that as well? Because that excites me also. It's like the idea of getting this information out there in an exciting way rather than just because no one's going to go read a research paper.
yeah. Yeah, I do think, I mean, I do think there's an aspect of science writing that is just, I think this is similar to what you're talking about, but to sort of bearing witness to the kind of research that's going on at our time and the kinds of things we're learning. And so, yes, like bringing out that study that might not have otherwise been covered. And then I think what a good science writer can do is sort of put that in perspective. So it's On
Yeah.
one hand, it might be a really promising finding, and on the other, it may be, how big was the sample size, or does this scale up, or is this widely applicable, or, you know, so bringing in like perspective for thinking about how do we think about these advances as well as sort of amplifying our awareness of them and telling people this is what's going on in your world and this is what people have found and you're right, maybe there is something that could be helpful or that could change people's perspectives about some idea um, or the way they see the world.
Where do you feel there is this like hang up when it comes to science and math? It just like turning on the boring switch for the vast majority of people. When it's like you and I, like we can read it and it's like, oh, this is so exciting, or this is so
Yeah.
interesting, or there's so many different facets that we can look at this. Why do you think that as a culture we have kind of turned into this, it's boring, it's uninteresting, it's not applicable
Yeah.
to us when it really does drive everything?
It's so hard to know if you're coming from a perspective where you think it's not boring. Like
Yeah.
it's so hard to identify where the bottlenecks might be slowing people down because there is, everybody has things they're interested in or not interested in um and so how do you even filter that out?
Yeah,
Find the
that's true.
people who would otherwise be interested in math, but who there's some way it's presented, or some, oftentimes
Yeah.
there's a lot of finger pointing in the math education community that you do too much memorization and you don't require enough memorization and you need to do this and you have to do this. And there's just so much fault, in
Mm,
the literature
yeah.
around math ed that just evolve. I mean, that would be interesting, just the evolution of how people blame
Yeah.
all these different things for why nobody likes math.
For you, how do you think about it? How do you stay above kind of that, the squabbling? What does it mean to you?
A couple things. One is to sort of, instead of thinking about math as sort of numbers and rules and even especially for a younger crowd, right? When you're introducing to people to math, instead of thinking about it as these sorts of like you have to do this way. One of the researchers actually in the book in Math Art, George Hart was so articulate about this because he talked about how kindergartners are natural mathematicians, but
Yes.
to appreciate that, we kind of have to think about math instead of, again, thinking about these rules and structures, thinking about pattern recognition. Um, how do we, how can you sort of help people, and it's not just kids, it's adults too, but how do you help them recognize that pattern recognition, which is something we are hardwired to do, which is something that, you know, that is something, I mean, neuroscientists know this better than anyone, right? That we see patterns of, Mother Teresa and a piece of toast. Like we can see patterns anywhere. Like this is a natural proclivity. And I think that if we could sort of take advantage of that and translate that into wonder and awe about mathematical ideas, that would be more accessible. And I
Mhm.
don't know if that means less or more memorization, or you have to know there probably is room for memorization, but is it necessary for every single kid? Like you start to get
Yeah,
into
because
this real
it
complexity.
depends on the kid, right? Of
Yeah,
what turns their pattern recognition for them.
yeah.
It's a little different for everyone.
It's like one thing I did when the school that I worked at right after graduation in downtown Dallas was really bonkers. I mean, it was it was they let us do anything, and I was
Oh, that's
22
fantastic.
or 23, so I would like round up these ridiculous um, tools, like an oversized fork that was like 3 feet long, and a piece of PVC pipe that was 4 feet long, or um, even I can't remember other good examples, boards, just random stuff, and I would make them go around downtown measuring things And then in terms of like, how many forks long is this? I had a didgeridoo somehow, and this is just coming back to me. So they would have to do sort of convert the units of how many didgeridoos equals how many forks, which is ridiculous, but also it was experiential. They could see it, they had to do it, they had to like they still had to do those conversions, like unit conversions, but once they could see like, oh, this one thing I can express in terms of these other things, like that sort of
Mm,
idea, then they could more easily translate that, or at least this was my hope, right, into say chemistry or using math, and seeing why you would want to be able to multiply or whatever.
mm,
I gave them another time I gave them stopwatches and I would send them into the skyscrapers in downtown. I'm sure we couldn't do this now, and I would have them measure the velocity of the elevators. And our quest was to find the
mm,
fastest elevator in downtown Dallas. And but with the added risk slash thrill of getting your measurement before the security guard escorted them out of the building to find me. And at the time, I was very young, so they often didn't even believe that I was their teacher. They thought like, they would just get mad. Uh, but
oh, that
but
is so fun.
but the
But
big
I can
yeah.
imagine that like what 20 years later and 19 years later, they remember those concepts and they know like, oh, I know how many forks fit into a didgeridoo, and now I know that. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, and to what end? Like I don't have health insurance, but I can I mean, yeah, I mean hopefully we were building
Mm,
skills of like how of these connections between things in the world. And so you had asked, why do people get turned off of math? And I think maybe we're just limited in how we present it, gauge it, and how we tell people they're good at it or not. And we're not
mm,
very creative embracing uncertainty or embracing different ways to think about it. One way I did find to write about math in my career was to find ways in which math was inspiration. So I wrote about these sculptors who had been inspired by math, or painters, or I even wrote, they didn't make it into the book, but there's a dance troupe called Two Guys Dancing About Math, and they somehow turn proofs into choreography. Would it make if you didn't already know the proof, would you understand the connection? I don't know, but it was just so interesting to me that there were all these different ways to get at elegance or beauty in math that weren't about having to work through your multiplication tables or learn the fundamental theorem of calculus, which all have their role and are so important to the rigor of math. But just in terms of like that big picture, what
yes.
how do we show people what mathematicians mean when they say something is elegant or rigorous, or
Mm,
there are all there's this vocabulary that is often inaccessible to the
mm.
ordinary person, and especially to the math hater, like to the math averse. I don't know if that
But
made
it's
sense.
like absolutely, and it does, and it's kind of like if you can go and talk in the language of beauty, relate it to something that everyone can understand beauty in their own way, right?
Yeah,
And perfection. And if you can use that common language to explain a proof or a theory, it brings it down to that common language. And I think that's actually a really beautiful segue into I have a few questions about your book. You've alluded to it several times, the math art book.
yeah,
And
sure.
it is it's just it's absolute beauty. And I noticed when I was reading through here that you really have such a gift for taking mathematics and writing about it as poetry. Like I was reading it and I was like, I feel like these
Thank you.
sentences that you're writing, it's it's poetry. It was, and I had never had that experience with math before.
Yeah, this
And
is a very kind thing to say. Thank you.
oh, it was just so beautiful. And I'll hold up the book at the end. So if anyone, I think just the front cover alone will exude beauty to you
Right,
and draw you
I
in.
love the front cover, still do. Yeah.
But you said mathematics has an intrinsic aesthetic, and when I read that. it kind of says to me like beauty has this inherent order, but it resides in something that seems very random.
I do think that there is an aesthetic side of math that is that again that we don't share for whatever reason we're not able to share or we don't share. And I think part of that is sort of making sense of something that seems out of control or if I use the word chaotic, I shouldn't have because there's a sort of specific definition of chaos, right? That's that's actually deterministic. But this idea of sort of
Interpretation, like when you think of math, sometimes it's actually both. It can seem really random or really controlled.
yeah,
From when it's the opposite end, and it's like you feel both of these about math, but then you bring in this beauty, which is kind of it doesn't have those same definitions.
yeah. So yeah, and I think I was struggling to get at why what we mean what we mean when we talk about beauty, right? In math. And the example that I start with in the book is that there were some neuroscientists, I guess now 15, 14, 15 years ago, and I won't get the story exactly right, but basically asked them to identify mathematical expressions that they thought were beautiful. And so they wrote these down. And then they hooked them up to fMRI to image their brain. And then they show them these things that they had already ranked as being beautiful. And when they saw the ones that they had ranked highest as being most beautiful, the same part of their brain became active as is active when we hear a piece of music that we would say is beautiful or look at a piece of art that is beautiful. So it wasn't the problem solving part of the brain or the like number crunching side or those areas that have been associated, but this area that's already been that has some connection to what we talk about when we talk about beauty. It's not causative. Like we don't want to say that there's more than that, but
Yeah.
there is this provocative association between that idea of beauty. And mathematicians will talk about a proof being beautiful. Uh, Paul Erdős, who's I think the most prolific mathematician in history, maybe Euler. I can't remember.
Hmm.
Um, but he would talk about this idea of the book, and the idea was these are proofs from God. I don't think he actually believed in God. But it's sort of this metaphor, right? That there's this collection of proofs that are just the most convincing, rigorous, elegant proofs, like the most perfect proof of these mathematical ideas. And I think you could make a comparison if you're watching watching March Madness and you see just the most beautiful three pointer, right? Or
Yes.
or there's just there's whatever your favorite sport is. There's just this play, and the way it carries out.
Yes.
I was saying this because I'm not usually into March Madness, but we were watching it, and there was this Michigan State game where there were just these assists that were like it was like choreography. So I think no matter what people are interested in, once you start to become familiar with the language and how it plays out, you recognize when something's done beautifully. You recognize this elegance that's special to the field, and I think that's true of math as well. That it is aesthetic. It feels like beauty. It feels like like a transcendent experience beyond, as you were saying, these sorts of negative feelings that many of us have about math, but instead is more. It feels
Mm.
creative and it feels like you're engaging with something larger than yourself. Um, I mean, I'm sure it's all neurochemicals flooding through or serotonin dumps or whatever, but still, it's that experience.
It's reminding me of that how much beauty, and this is just part of the human experience, right? How much beauty we actually miss out on because for us to experience beauty at that level, we have to know something about whatever
Hmm.
it is. And so, how much beauty are we missing out on throughout our day by not? educating ourselves about different topics or subjects or
Mm,
um, scenarios of where we could expand the beauty that we experience on the day, on the
yeah.
daily, if we just continued to grow and learn and feed
Mm.
ourselves as we continue to age.
Everybody has all these human experiences. Like everyone's an expert in their own perception. Maybe it's even just taking a second and just being like, mark that, that moment and be like, wait, I'm going to take a second because that really was perfectly executed, or that really was, um, you know, well done. Whatever this thing is that I'm familiar with.
Mm. And I mean, that's such a good reminder, right? Because so often we can be wired to look for where it's faulty or where it could be better. In that intentional moment to be like, yes, that was executed well,
Yeah.
or, ooh, when I look at that, that is it's just perfect. It's like taking that extra step because we spend so much our energies throughout the day focusing on, well, that could have been better,
Hmm.
or that assist could have been better, that the
Yeah.
five in the game and the one or two that looked like a dance.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, and there's certainly room for that. Like, it could have been better. I mean, math is very well known for for that could have been
Being
better,
that,
or finding mistakes.
yeah.
Like that certainly has its place. Um, or I mean, and there's even a sense in which science. I think that I really scientists who are very sort of trying to think of how to explain this. There's an idea that comes across in interviews sometimes where I realize that a scientist's perception of his field or her field or their field is that their job is to just keep trying to disprove things.
Yeah.
Keep trying to
Yeah.
disprove this
Yeah.
hypothesis. And so our best idea of science is
Mm.
actually the ideas that we haven't been able to disprove yet, which I love. Like the fact checker critical side of me is like, yes, like that's a great definition of science, not sort of we have found the truth with a capital
Mhm.
T, but that we have failed to we have failed to disprove our best ideas. So to me, it's a double-edged sword. I think that you might say that that's really critical, but it's so important. But I also think there's room, as you said, to take a minute and just be like, but hey, we haven't disproved this thing yet. I mean,
Mhm.
it must be a pretty good idea so far. But I
I
do think there's room to think about that as well. So
Oh, it's like you said, it's like a double-edged sword, or it doesn't even need to be a sword. It's just two ends of the same stick, right? And both
yeah,
coexist together.
yeah.
I I wonder with this, what I appreciated when you were telling us kind of your story of how you came into science writing was you were drawn to math, but it wasn't the thing that came so easily to you. I feel like so many people, when they realize something that they like and there's not a solution for how to engage with it,
Mhm.
they stop following it, the perseverance to make something happen. How did you keep that perseverance alive in you for so long of trying to find how to incorporate math in a way that worked for you?
I guess it's hard for me to see it as perseverance so much as it was like you have to do something, and you have to have a job, you have to like, and I did enjoy teaching, and I liked math, so I was still able to engage, like when I was a math teacher, I was still able to engage with the material in a meaningful way, not like pushing the frontiers of it, but still thinking in that way, I think was for whatever reason was something I like to do. And then the writing side was less of I mean, I'd love to say that I was just so disciplined and was so just good about writing, but I don't think that was the case. I think um, writing was almost like a compulsion. Like it was the thing that I would default to if I was happy or stressed or whatever. Like it was
Oh,
just sort of the thing that was always there.
mm,
So it didn't feel. I mean, it was certainly work, but it was also this sort of, annoying editor friend partner in your head that was like, oh, now you have to write. And they wouldn't shut up, right, until you did. So it wasn't. So I'd love to say that I had developed some discipline, but honestly, it wasn't even until like I said, as I'm an intern in New York City. I remember being in this meeting and saying like, "Oh, I was married last year, and we have a child due." And I still remember this one editor being like, "Oh my God, what are you doing married?" And someone else is like, "What are you doing having a kid? Like you're in it like this like it was my Midwestern inner critic just jumping down at me like, what are you doing? Like that's so irresponsible." But I could only see that as the only way forward. Um,
Yeah.
so and once and actually honestly once I became a dad, I did develop discipline. Like I really learned how to structure time and realized that if you're going to give time to your child and your family, then your time is super precious. Like it's super valuable. So, everything from sort of timing my interview calls when he was asleep, or, you know,
Yeah.
doing work while we were out at a park if he fell asleep in the stroller, having sort of something I could knock out. But I did. It was only at that point, out of necessity, that I became disciplined. Like I said, so all that to say, that's the long version, is that I would love to say that I just had some sort of high-minded ability to do it, but it was definitely a combination of practicality and, for whatever reason, my compulsion in my brain. I
Absolutely.
didn't feel like it was anything intentional until I realized, like I said, you got to get your stuff done
Yeah.
once you only have so much time to do it in.
I'm really curious about what you are currently working on,
Mhm.
or if you would like to highlight some of the past writings that you have done that really stuck out to you from an interesting perspective.
Sure. Yeah, so what maybe I can highlight a few pieces from the last year or two, and then I can tell you sort of what's coming up
That'd be
next.
amazing.
Um, so some of the pieces I was most proud of recently, one was a piece for Scientific American, and it focused on this experiment that a forest ecologist is carrying out in Oregon, in this mountain forest in Oregon, where 40 years ago, he organized this experiment where they basically cut down 500 trees and they laid them out in the woods to watch them decompose. And the idea is that it is a 200-year experiment driven by his awareness that we don't actually understand a lot about how decomposition of wood affects an ecosystem. We have these sort of simple proclamations like, oh, it's a carbon storage, so it's going to hold carbon, or oh, those trees are down and now they don't have any more value, so we should remove them so they're not a fire risk. Or so everything that ecologists talk about with dead trees, he realized was simplistic. And what we needed was more information about this thing that, as it turns out, unfolds over a time scale well beyond the human lifetime. And we don't have a good way to think about these questions, about these long processes. And so that was the goal. And so I was drawn to it because here you have somebody who was starting something that he wouldn't see the end of, and his successors wouldn't see the end of. So there's this sort of optimism isn't the right word, but vision. And he met a lot of resistance, right? Because it does. I mean, when I
Absolutely.
was trying to tell people I was writing about this, I kept running into this too. Like he would tell people, "Oh, I want to, I want these logs to rot in the woods because it affects what we know about carbon, and so that climate change, but also forest management and ecology and even microbiology of the things that break down wood. So there are all these valid, excellent scientific questions built into it. But as he's telling people, I want to cut down trees and let them rot, he met a lot of people who are like, "Oh my God, like fucking you idiot,
Crazy for doing this. Like
yeah,
you're
you're
ruining
crazy.
the
What a
ecosystem
dumb
right now.
idea." He said even the
Yes.
people who were like working on it, and he would try to explain it, and they would come around. But I just, to me, I guess the reason I was drawn to it was I thought it was a fascinating scientific perspective and question that was very unusual, and the persistence of this particular researcher to do this. So that was a piece I had. It was in Scientific American last year, I think. More
I
recently,
actually
what's
could
that?
I just on that? I just find that really it is very interesting, and I can see why you wrote about it. But I think like just in our culture today, we're very like we want answers pretty quickly, and we
Yeah,
want and that makes us feel good. And so for
yeah,
someone to really like in our face go against everything that we
yeah.
want, it makes it really feel uncomfortable. Maybe getting the answer, but
Mhm.
those are the kind of answers we need to have that longevity. Those are the things that will provide us the answers for like what we're dealing with. And we want
Yeah,
quick answers now, but it they're long-term answers. Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing
yeah,
that one.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree. Like I do think we want the fast turnaround. We don't have patience for
Mhm.
long results, and ultimately, what this will produce is a data set. Like it's like there
Totally.
are some specific scientific questions that will be answered, but also it will be this valuable baseline,
Mhm.
um, that could be used to understand everything from floods and droughts and all the extreme weather events that um, that are coming with climate change that we're already seeing increased frequency of. So, but it's so interesting, like that scope of vision, I thought was just fascinating.
My brain doesn't even know what to think about it. It
Yeah.
just kind of like pinging around trying to like, what do I think about it? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's humbling to think too, like we won't know. Like we
No,
we
we won't. That's
it is sort of irritating. We're cut out of this loop that there are
yeah,
these things, ways in which the world is changing that are totally that have the audacity to not be on our timeline, that we won't
yes.
have the answer to that question. It does feel like an affront.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah, as you were talking, it was like, whoa, that feels really uncomfortable, actually.
mhm.
So thank you for sharing that one. That was super interesting. You said you had
Yeah.
another one
Yeah,
that you
more
were,
recently, this one's even maybe more immediately discomforting.
oh
Um,
no.
I know, I know, I'm drawn to stories with bad, actually, you'll see, I really am drawn to stories about decomposition, and things falling apart. But this was a story. It ran in MIT Technology Review, which is produced by MIT, but it's a science magazine. It's incredibly rigorous, and they do incredible work, um, and just have such a talented everything. I love writing for them as well. But this it was a story where in the last couple years, there's been this consortium of synthetic biologists and chemists and other scientists and ethicists who have been raising alarm about this area of research called mirror life biology. And the idea is that most most of the amino acids that make up proteins and most of the even drugs that we use, many of the drugs that we use function have a right-handedness or a left-handedness. But they have a handedness, like DNA, right? DNA has a specific way that it turns, and it doesn't turn the other way. And so there's been this interest in the last 6 or 7 years in particular, but actually going back to George Church in the 90s, early 2000s, I don't know, of sort of developing synthetic organisms that turn in the other way.
Oh,
So developing synthetic cells and ultimately organisms that would have this opposite, what's called chirality, this opposite way of turning. And it was exciting at first because it suggested a new way to think about life and developing life and why do we have handedness? This deep question that goes back to the very beginning of life. So we don't know why there's handedness. There's excitement because um, like a drug that has opposite handedness would evade the immune system and wouldn't break down as much. So, for example, there's interest right now in a GLP-1 anti-chirality drug that would persist longer in a person's body. So you wouldn't have to take as much. So, so there were lots of reasons to be excited about it, but what happened was that slowly researchers realized that, oh, wait, if you got an infection with something that was antichiral, we don't have any defenses. Our immune system, it would evade our immune system. And if it could proliferate in the body, then suddenly you have an infection that not only can't be touched by antibiotics, but because it's antichiral, there's nothing natural that could attack it.
Oh,
And that could spread to ecosystems and plants and animals. And basically, the worst case scenario is that it would wipe out life on Earth. So, so suddenly, these
well,
synthetic biologists are not as excited about developing mirror life organisms because we don't know the risk. It's either really exciting or wipes out all life on Earth, or somewhere in between. So, so the piece that I
so
wrote.
what? Oh
Okay.
yeah, sorry. It just yeah, it made my brain go
Yeah, I know.
But
It's a
what
lot to
what
throw out there. Yeah.
what do you do with that though when you've already let it out? It's like Pandora's box is already out. You
Yeah.
cannot not because someone will use this for something. It is just always
Yeah.
that's not I guess there's no answer to that, but
Yeah. I mean, that's right. That's the case against making it
mm,
a mirror life organism because it will escape from the lab. It will, someone will figure out how to use this to hurt people. Uh, there's a so this is sort of the latest example in science of, yeah, if you see if you have this ability to develop something um, that could be used to hurt people, what is your obligation? And
mhm.
so a lot of the conversation is, some researchers say, well, we can develop everything up to the actual organism. And some say, no, we need a stopping point before that. Because if we
Oh,
get to a certain point, then some bad actors could take it the rest of the way. And some say, oh no, we can't have any work on mirror life biology. Well, there's nobody's really saying no work at all on it. But the question is, we don't know what the point of no return is um, to get there. And then there are some people who say, no, these risks are overblown. They're all hypothetical. How can you know how destructive something's going to be unless you make it?
yeah.
Which is true, but
There's some
you weigh that
validity.
against the risk of wiping out humanity. So there are all these issues. Like not everyone agrees it's a big risk. Some people say it's too far out and too complicated to ever actually synthesize.
Mhm.
Some say we don't know where to draw the line. Um, so it's just a mess. Uh, but
That's
fascinating because you
incredible.
wonder like, oh, can scientists regulate themselves? Or is this a policy
Mm.
issue? Or is this a legal issue? Or anyway, it brings in all these different both
Like,
historical precedents, but also it's totally new territory because do we stop research out of fear of where it could lead?
mhm. But then, but then there needs to be, yeah, I guess it's the whole ethical part of who's doing the research too. I mean, it should, but we're humans, right? We're humans, and
Right.
everyone has their own drive, and well,
Yeah.
that's. I don't even know what to say to that. I'm going to get off of this, and that's going to be going through my head the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I'm,
Very
wow.
upsetting. Um, and the story, my piece was so last year. so this all started sort of blew up in December of 24, and so there were some really good pieces that were published last year in some different magazines. And so when I came to Technology Review and said I wanted to write about it, I my editor was like, okay, but what's new? This has been the risks have been pretty well covered, and there were plenty of stories about what a terrible catastrophe this could be. But she was really smart. She was like, but the story we haven't heard is how we got here. Like, how did
Yeah.
we, and then what sort of projecting that forward. So how do you go from this having this idea that just seems like it's amazing and super exciting and everybody's into it to, oh my God, it's going to destroy life.
This
Like that's a
really is like
pretty,
sci-fi
yeah,
to life.
that's a pretty dramatic turnaround. And that story hadn't been told. So that's what my article did, was
That's
that sort of
and
human story, right? Of sort of this realization.
I imagine as just we continue to go on, there's probably going to be more and more of these stories on a bigger, grander scale, right? Just because where we are in the life of science now, there's going to
Mhm.
be more of these stories at the mirror.
Yeah, and I mean, one piece we took ended up cutting out for space was that as I was putting it together, Dario Amodei, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Anthropic, that put out Claude, right, the AI large
Yes,
language model. He weighed in and basically said, "Oh, this is on my radar too. I think AI will be able to do this and sort of come up, spin up the recipe for mirror life." So that's another threat. Like even if scientists cut themselves off, are we going to have AI models that are going to be able to, with a lot of trial and error, like it'll take a long time and the first efforts will be kind of fragile, but is that a formidable risk? We don't know. Like, is that a potential risk? So, yes, so many dimensions, so
there.
many ways the world could end.
I'm sure you remain hopeful, right? Even though you do write about, you said you're drawn to the destructive nature of things. Do you overall remain hopeful that, or do you see things going in kind of a concerning? Because you have spoken about AI and you just brought it up again, and
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of risks that we have to
mm,
be aware of with AI. But I also think that nobody really has a handle on it right now.
mhm, yeah,
I do think that the risks that I worry about, you know, working, there are a lot of microbiological risks out there and ways to sort of use, you know, microbiology to hurt people or, you know, um, communities that are going to be at risk from climate change. I think we're going to be protected from that for a long time in the United States, but in other parts of the world, I think that risk is much more imminent and threatening, and I think we run the risk of not hearing about that, um, or being aware of that. But I do think that complexity is on our side, if that makes sense. Like it's
yes,
I don't see doom and gloom in the near future because we have literally a chaotic system of forces and responses and the ways people are creative and come up with solutions, and whether it's at the scale of our families and our communities and our cities, um, it would be great to have a little more confidence in sort of the like that we had visionaries at the top, and I don't think we do right now. But I do think that people are incredibly creative, and I do think there are ways to manage local scale our lives at a local scale that can be where we can experience joy and beauty and all these things. I don't think we've lost that. Um, and to me, like I said, the threats are just so complex right now that it's hard to know how they're going to play out. I think I just totally avoided answering that question.
yeah. I and that's
Sorry.
perfectly. It will it will let us after we're done here, we can just let it simmer in our brain for the
Yeah.
next couple weeks what you've said. I didn't want to cut short though. You wanted to get back and you wanted to mention things that you're currently working on.
Yes, I would. I would love to. I have a book coming out next year. I would love to plug the book.
Oh,
Um, yeah,
yes,
it's
please
coming
do.
out probably in January or February. Um, and it is the title is A Brief History of the End of the Universe and Everything in It. And so,
So
but it's
appropriate.
not. There's no
Talking about
despair. It's
okay.
um, but it traces sort of how everything the mantra is basically everything is always falling apart and that's okay. So it traces how things break down from the level of cells up to tissues up to the human body to trees. So the piece I was describing from Scientific American, he is also in the book, to whales on the seafloor, and then on to how planets fall apart and stars, and ultimately the end of the universe. So it scales across space, and the idea really is that um, it's driven by the second law of thermodynamics in physics, which basically says that on the big scale, entropy is increasing. So, but it's also making the case that that same big rule that on the biggest scale, everything, or in a closed system, um, entropy is increasing. But that also allows for these sorts of pockets of non-equilibrium and structure to emerge. So the only reason we even have structure is because something else lost structure. As an example, with the cells, every cell has most cells, I should say, have a self-destruct mechanism, right? They have these sequences. It's called apoptosis, where a cell can self-destruct, and it has this sort of tidy process that it dies. And it's because of apoptosis that we have fingers, right? That we don't have webbed hands because we develop these webs, but then the ones in between the fingers die off. So we end up with these structures. Um, but I sort of describe how that happens at all these different scales. Basically, that same idea that as something, here's how things fall apart, and then what does that mean for being alive
It
or
all
having structure?
yes. It ultimately leads to something new, something
Yeah,
life-giving. Yes.
exactly.
Oh, I love that so much. And I can't wait to actually tell my son about this because he loves the second law of thermodynamics. He has it written on his whiteboard in his room. He loves it.
Oh
So I'll
yeah,
say, there's a whole book coming out.
that's right.
But
For fans of right, that'd be a good tagline. For fans of the second law of thermodynamics.
there you
If you
go.
love the second law of thermodynamics, you'll love this book.
That's right. And even if you don't know what it is, it's enough to like pique your interest. Well, what is, should I be loving the second law?
Yeah, right. I guess I should. I guess I should buy this book.
That sounds really, really fantastic. And like you said, it actually sounds really hopeful that it's just
I think I
kind
think
of
it's
the
at
order
least putting that
structure.
idea of falling apart into a broader context to way maybe
Mhm.
where it's not as threatening. Or if we get a little bit better sense of sort of what's natural maybe, or what are these
Mhm.
natural processes. I
Yeah,
don't know.
that
I
it's
had
not
one
so
editor, I was describing it to her, and she was like, she was silent for a second, or maybe it was by email, but she was like, "Oh my God," she's like, "I think you should give out Lexapro with the book, like an antidepressant, like like as a." But anyway,
I, that actually is really funny. But but you're right. It's like when you can explain something that this is just natural, it does take the sting out of it. And then it's just left up to us to deal with change, right? As humans, we're averse to
yeah.
change, but then we just have to, we're left with just having to deal with that is life.
Hmm.
And it's okay. But
Yeah,
it
and
does
it's
make it more manageable.
I think so. I mean, I my goal it was to make it seem more manageable. Like if we can recognize these patterns actually that are playing out at all these different scales and put that in context of what it means for our stuff to fall apart, whether it's breaking a glass or losing a loved one, like maybe we have a little bit of a broader perspective, and so it doesn't seem as uh, as sharp, maybe.
Ye- Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Can you give us the name of that again so we can be on the lookout for when early next year?
Sure, it's a long title, but it was a brief history of the end of the universe and everything in it.
I love it. Wow, I love it so much.
Thank you.
Well, and I did say, I just wanted to show this was the book that actually introduced myself and my family to Stephen. We had someone recommended to us. And so that alone, you can get and read Math Art, Truth, Beauty, and Equations before his next book comes out. Do you have anything else that you would love to share with us before we end our time together? There's always stuff, but if there is, I love the different aspects that you've been bringing in today. So if there's anything else, I would love to hear it.
I don't know. I also teach at Vanderbilt, so the semester just wrapped up, and so I guess I could tell you sort of what I hope my students take away because we spend a lot of time talking about tools of science communication and how to think about your audience and how to reach out to people. And one thing that I always want them to take away is to both maintain that sense of wonder and curiosity and excitement about new findings, like you were describing, that may get overlooked or but still push our knowledge in new directions or have the potential to change things. So on one hand, we can maintain that excitement and keep asking better questions, and then on the other hand, still be critical and recognize how imperfect these systems are that produce this and how all the uncertainty that's wrapped up in it. And I think if we can hold both of those together, um, like I want my students to be able to hold both of those together in terms of thinking about science and inquiry, then I think that we can make a little more sense of the world and maybe have a little less fear of how it's changing.
That's actually that's beautiful because it's like I feel like so often it's either one or the other. We feel like one is good, one is bad. And
Hmm.
so many things we are not like we haven't trained our brain that things can
Yeah.
coexist. And the duality of the coexistence of things is that's really life, but it until we can really understand that there is more fear. There's just yeah, that's a beautiful place
Yeah.
to take your students.
Great.
Mm.
Well, I hope they
Well,
think so.
well, even if not now, in like 10, 15 years from now, as they gain a little more life experience in whatever field they're in, they'll be like, oh, well, it's nice to be able to coexist with multiple ways of thinking.
Yeah. Maybe this knee-jerk reaction or this like reaction I'm seeing on social media or whatever isn't the whole story. Maybe I can
Yes.
ask questions and find out more, like get some context, get some perspective.
Yeah. That
Um,
curiosity. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Your words, there's already so many things that I want to get off and just let marinate in my head and think about. So thank you for bringing those up. And I really do look forward to seeing more of your publications and your book next year. So
great. Well, thank
thank
you. Thank you so much for having me on. This was fun.